Good morning, everyone. It is your host, Millionaire Williams, with the National Military Prayer Network. And normally I come on each Thursday morning from 8 a.m. until 8:45 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, sharing with you prayers of this nation in which we're in desperate need of, but specifically for our military families, our veterans, those that are deployed, active duty. And, I've been commissioned by the Lord to pray for a different state of the United States of America concerning those that I just mentioned. But for Black History Month, I have a special edition here that last week I talked about the Buffalo Soldiers. This week I will be highlighting the Harlem Hellfighters, which a lot of you may not have ever heard of, because a lot of times, with our blacks that have served in the military, that first line that has been out there, we've only heard about the Buffalo Soldiers or the Tuskegee Airmen. And so I'm here to highlight all 4 Thursdays of the month a different branch of service, but those blacks that were the first on the scene to be accepted. And I say accepted in a way that there's a caveat to that. Because, you can be accepted somewhere. Oh, I'll give you an example, because this happened to me when I was county commissioner. I was invited to a Black event, and because I was Republican at the time, and I know that's why, because any official would certainly sit in the front of a room, and they had me towards the back. And I said to my husband, you know what, it's time for us to leave. And I realized then that you can be invited anywhere. Doesn't mean that you're welcome. So that was a big ha-ha moment for me, because people may do things out of protocol, but they let you know that you're not really welcome in this space. But, we had to do this. And so I kind of see that as, all African Americans that gave their blood, gave their oath for this country, but they were never welcome. And what's sad about today, and I'm operating, well, this is not sad, but I'm operating in 2 cameras, so I'm going to go back and forth. But the sad part about it is that here I am talking about the dates here: Buffalo Soldiers, September 21, 1866. And today, the Harlem Hellfighters, February 17, 1919. And we're still dealing with all these issues of these racial discrimination atrocities in this country, like we're talking back in 1800s. I mean, it's just sad. I mean, and I don't want to get off on that tangent, because I can go there. It is what it is, but America, again, you've got to do better by a lot of people, not just African Americans, but I'm going to continue what I've been commissioned to do today, and that is to bring you information about the Harlem Hellfighters, how they came about, who they were, the time that they served, and what they did during that time of service. And I also want to just read, and I'll be reading this information today for you, so forgive me for that. But I also like to talk about African American History Month, how it came about. So I'm going to read for educational process here as well, okay? In 1926, Dr. Carter G. Woodson instituted the first week-long celebration to raise awareness of African Americans' contributions to history. And I'm going to stop right there and pause for half a second, because there was a reason that this came about. And it had everything to do with, when you go back in our history books, I'm May 20th, 65 years young, and I'm grateful for my age. I've never been the type of person or woman, oh, I don't tell my age. No, I am grateful to be looking as good as I am, in health, living, breathing. God has blessed me. Amen and hallelujah. So I am proud of every last one of them 65 years. May 20th, 1956, I came to the earth realm and been rolling ever since, and I am proud of it. So, without further ado, but the reason, because a lot of people think, oh, okay, well, why, blacks got to celebrate Black History Month and African American history or whatever. But I am telling you, our history books never told the story. We were never educated about the contributions of African Americans in this country. And still, people don't want to pay homage to it. I mean, and I don't get it, because we don't get celebrated, any other time in this nation to talk about the contributions that we've made. And it's very sad, because when that happens, it's deception. When that happens, you're not telling the whole story. When that happens, you're lying to people. And so it's not a matter of coming to the forefront above other people, but let's have an equal status report of who's done what. I was sitting last night with my husband, we were watching TV, but I was on the sideline doing some research of, African Americans' inventions. Oh my God, the list is broad, the list is wide. But do you think we can name people that have invented all these different things? I was just sitting there like, oh my God. Some of the things I knew, that a Black man invented the elevator. I mean, the lawnmower. There's just so many different areas of science, physics, and the contributions are what we are still having the benefits of today. And so that's the reason why this is still celebrated, because we're not highlighted as a people. We've been suppressed, and we all know that. So, and guess what? And it's still happening today. So, let's not try to act like, oh, why are Black people still having this conversation? Excuse me. Come on. It still exists. Stop it. Don't act like it's not happening in America. We're all adults here. Okay, we're not kindergarten children. We've got critical thinking skills. We've got observation skills. I mean, it's still happening in America, and it needs to stop, because we're not going anywhere. And I know I'm not going anywhere until the Almighty God says, okay, well done, my good and faithful servant. You've done what I've called you to do. Okay, so it's a matter of respect and dignity to people, no matter who it is. We all, as a human being, I don't care if I was pink polka dots, but if I am a human being, I deserve respect. And then at the same time, I must give respect. So this should be a reciprocal relationship. And again, here I am veered off, but you guys know I will do that to step into some places, but I will always come back. So back to the program, okay? And I'm going to read that over again. The African American History Month how it came about and who was responsible for bringing it to the forefront. So in 1926, Dr. Carter G. Woodson instituted the first week-long celebration to raise awareness of African Americans' contributions to history. Prior to this time, here I go, little information could be found regarding African American history. Important achievements were left out of history books, and this is my quote, purposely. And there was a general misconception that African Americans had made little contribution to U.S. society or history. Lies. You don't get my commentaries. 50 years later, the week became a month, and today, February is celebrated as African American History Month. The month of February was chosen because it celebrates the birthdays of Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass, who was a writer, lecturer, editor, and civil rights activist who escaped slavery at age 21 and went on to campaign for the abolition of slavery, established a newspaper, and held office of minister to Haiti. He was a major voice in the anti-slavery civil rights movement of this time. Abraham Lincoln, born February 12, 1809, as the 16th President of the United States, issued the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1, 1863, thereby declaring that all slaves within the Confederacy would be permanently free. Physically free, but the mind still is not free. That's my editorial, okay? I'm just saying. Each year, the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, founded by Dr. Woodson, sets the theme for the month. So that explains to you how Black History Month came about, who, the what, the when, when you answer all those 5 W's. And so, hello there, Ursula. Thank you so much for watching this morning and joining me, my dear. I'm here sharing about the Harlem Hellfighters. I'm here to talk about Black History Month, and each Thursday I'm highlighting, because my lane is at military, but however, I slip into a few other lanes when I'm talking. And I also put together, this is interesting. It says, Civil Rights 1964, Church Bombings, Redlining 1933, Black Codes, Mental Illness, Switch and Bait, Abortions, Rodney King 1991, The Use of the N-Word, Margaret Sanger. And if you don't know who she is, that's the abortion that came about into the Black communities. And believe me, there was a purpose behind it. So maybe I'll do some more history lessons there as well. Eugenics, Annihilate, Selma, 1965, Watts Riots, 1965, the Black Wall Street, and I'll tell you some of this, the writing is so small, brainwashing. Let me see, what else do I have here? Okay, intimidation. So I think you get the message here, where I was going with this, and just listing all of these atrocities that have happened in the Black community. But without further ado, I am going to share with you about who were the Harlem Hellfighters. And so, as it reads, and this article is by Henry Louis Gates Jr., and it was originally posted on what's called The Root. So, Harlem Hellfighters Homecoming Parade. Up the wide avenue they swung. Their smiles outshone the golden sunlight. In every line, proud chest expanded. Beneath the medals, valor had won. The impassioned cheering of the crowds massed along the way drowned the blaring cadence of their former jazz band. The old 15th was on parade, and New York turned out to tender its dark-skinned heroes a New York welcome, known as the Harlem Hellfighters. So began the 3-page spread the New York Tribune ran February 18, 1919, a day after 3,000 veterans of the 369th Infantry, formerly the 15th New York, quote-unquote, Colored Regiment, paraded up from 5th Avenue and 23rd Street to 145th Street and Lenox. And Sergio, thank you, my darling. You know I'm on my post. Hoorah, my brother. One of the few black combat regiments in World War I, they'd earned the prestigious Croix de Guerre from the French army, under which they'd served for 6 months of brave and bitter fighting. Their nickname they received from their German foes, Hellfighters. So you know, for the Germans to have referred to this group of black veterans as Hellfighters, they had to be something bad to mess with. The Harlem Hellfighters. In their ranks was one of the Great War's greatest heroes, Private Henry Johnson of Albany, New York, who, though riding in a car for the wounded, was so moved by the outpouring, he stood up, waving the bouquet of flowers he had been handed. It would take another 77 years for Johnson to receive an official Purple Heart from his own government, which is sad, Millions editorial. But on this day, not even the steel plate in his foot could weigh him down. It was, the newspapers noted, the first opportunity the city of New York had to greet a full regiment of returning doughboys, black or white. The Chicago Defender put the crowd at 2 million. The New York Tribune at 5 million, with even the New York Times conservatively estimating it at hundreds of thousands. So it must have been a great crowd to receive the Harlem Hellfighters. Never have white Americans accorded so heartfelt and hearty a reception to a contingent of their black countrymen. The Tribune continued. And the ebony warriors felt it, literally, beneath a hail of chocolate candy, cigarettes, and coins raining down on them from open windows and down the avenues. It would have been hard to miss them, at least according to the New York Times, to whom all the men appeared 7 feet tall. Yet, as rousing as those well wishes were, the Tribune pointed out, the greeting the regiment received along 5th Avenue was to the tumult which greeted it in Harlem, as was the west wind to a tornado. That is powerful when you think about that. After all, 70% of the 369th call Harlem home, and their families, friends, and neighbors had turned out in full force to thank and welcome those who made it back. 800 hadn't, and absence recalled in the number of handkerchiefs drying wet eyes. And I purposely had a moment of silence for the fallen comrades. Thank you. That morning, it had taken 4 trains and 2 ferries to transport the black veterans and their white officers from Camp Upton on Long Island to Manhattan. And the parade kicking off at 11 a.m., an echo of the armistice that had halted the fighting 3 months before, stretched 7 miles long. In his 1845 slave narrative, Frederick Douglass had likened his master to a snake. Now, a rattlesnake adorned the black veterans' uniforms, their insignia. On hand to greet them was a host of dignitaries, including the African-American leader, Emmett Scott. And we know. Special adjunct to the Secretary of War, William Randolph Hearst, and New York's popular Irish Catholic governor, Al Smith, who reviewed his hellfighters from a pair of stands on 60th and 133rd Streets. In Harlem, the Chicago Defender observed, February 17, 1919 was an unofficial holiday, with black school children granted dismissal by the Board of Education. A similar greeting on the same day, in fact, met the returning black veterans of the 370th Infantry, the old 8th Illinois, in Chicago. Chad L. Williams writes in his 2010 book, Torch Bearers of Democracy, African American Soldiers in the World War Era. And in the coming months, there would be other celebrations, even in the Jim Crow South. Imagine that. That's Millions editorial. Most notably, Savannah, Georgia, the state that in 1917 and 1918 led the nation in lynchings, according to statistics published by the Tuskegee Institute. It was, to be sure, a singular season, a pause between the end of hostilities abroad and the resumption of hostilities at home in a nation still divided so starkly, so violently by the color line, which we still see today in 2021. How sad. Again, Millions editorial. Congress would not make Armistice Day an official U.S. holiday until 1938, and it would not be called Veterans Day until 1954. Imagine that. But the people of New York didn't need Congress to tell them what to do when their black fighting men returned home. And so you might say, the first Veterans Day parade, very interesting, in New York, associated with Armistice Day, was held for black soldiers on February 17, 1919, during the month that would eventually be set aside for Black history. Imagine that. Now, this is titled Blacks Debate the War Effort. 2 years before, on April 2nd, 1917, President Woodrow Wilson asked Congress for a declaration of war in order to enter a conflict between European powers that had started over the assassination of an archduke in 1914. The world must be safe for democracy, the president said. Boy, look, this is like interesting because all what's going on in this nation in our capital, January 6, 2021. And I'm talking about things that have happened in 1970. America, when I look at those years, the difference and the process in between, looks like we're still here. Yesteryears. Again, Millions editorial. And back to the program. The world must be safe for democracy, the president said. The nation's allies, the British, French, and Russians, its enemies, Germany, Italy, Austria-Hungary, and the so-called Central Powers. For some African Americans, Wilson's rhetoric smacked of hypocrisy. After all, he was the president who had screened Birth of a Nation, a film glorifying the Ku Klux Klan, at the White House. Sounds like just yesterday. And refused to support a federal anti-lynching bill. Still sounds like the White House. Even though each year averaged more than one lynching a week, predominantly in former Confederate states that have effectively stripped black men of their voting rights. America, America. Who are you? What are you? What? It's hard to read this stuff. This is my editorial now because I'm not reading. But it's hard to read this stuff because this is stuff that happened so many years ago. However, Lee Gray, thank you so much for being a part of my audience this morning. But again, we're living, it seems like everything that I'm reading that happened back in the 1917, 1919. Wow. Yeah, Ursula, you're right. Nothing has changed. There is still dissension among the righteous going on in this nation daily, as I'm sharing, as I'm reading. The fabric of America is still woven, steeped in racial divide. January 6, 2021. Just yesterday. Okay, let me get back to the read here. Will someone tell us just how long Mr. Wilson has been a convert to true democracy? The Baltimore Afro-American editorialized on April 28, 1917. And this is a quote from him. Patriotism has no appeal for us. Justice has The Messenger, a socialist publication launched by editors Chandler Owen and A. Philip Randolph of March on Washington fame, declared November 1, 1917. A sentiment that would land both men in jail under the Espionage Act in 1918. Quote, call was coming in. Many more blacks viewed the war as an opportunity for victory at home and abroad. W.E. Du Bois, a founder of the NAACP in 1909, urged his fellow Americans to close ranks in a now infamous piece he wrote for the crises in July 1918, despite the persistent segregation of black officers at training camps. Let us, this is in quotes, while this war lasts, forget our special grievances and close our ranks shoulder to shoulder with our white fellow citizens and the allied nations that are fighting for democracy. Du Bois added, a stance William notes that would stir controversy when Du Bois was exposed for making simultaneous efforts to secure a captaincy for himself. Like, can we just get along with them? So, in all, William writes, 2.3 million blacks registered for the draft during World War I. Although, okay, Ross, Sergio, I hope you're still with me when I'm about to read. I'll say that again. 2.3 million blacks registered for the draft during World War I. Although the Marines would not accept them and the Navy enlisted few and only in menial positions, large numbers served in the Army. Some 375,000 blacks served overall, including 639 men who received commissions, a historical first. Williams adds in his essay, African Americans in World War I. And then wartime violence. The U.S. Army segregated its black troops into 2 combat divisions. Again, remember at the beginning I said how you can be invited somewhere, but you're not welcome. Hence, again, the U.S. Army segregated its black troops into 2 combat divisions, the 92nd and the 93rd, because, as Williams explains, war planners deemed racial segregation, just as in civilian life, and the most logical and efficient way of managing the presence of African Americans in the Army. But a different kind of violence soon spread. At home, most notably in East St. Louis, where on July 2nd, 1917, the rumor that a black man had killed a white man resulted in the murder of 9 whites and hundreds of blacks. Look at the numbers, 9 whites and hundreds of blacks. Not to mention $500,000 in property damage. Things weren't much better in the South. On August 23, 1917, black soldiers and the 24th Infantry garrisoned in Houston revolted when one of their comrades was beaten and arrested by 2 white police officers after he tried to stop them from arresting a black woman. Quickly, rumors flew that a white mob was approaching the camp, which, whether true or not, prompted the black troops to scur the camp for ammunition under the notion that the best defense is a good defense. Marching through the rain to Houston, they killed 15 people, including 4 policemen and a member of the Illinois National Guard. 2 of the black soldiers died in the fighting, one shooting himself in the head rather than risking capture. 10 men probably could not begin to tell the complete story of what took place that night. Lynn Smith quotes Army Prosecutor Colonel Hull, yet in the fallout, they charged 63 members of the battalion with mutiny, and listen to this, and hanged 13 in their Army khakis. Lynchings. Okay, and this will be the last part of my reading here. Of the 370,000 blacks who served in World War I, 200,000 shipped out overseas. But even in the theater of war, few saw combat. Most suffered through back-breaking labor in non-combat service units as part of the services of supply. Lynn Smith puts the number of combat troops at 42,000, only 11% of all blacks in the Army. For the first of the two black combat divisions, the 92nd, the Great War was a nightmare. Not only were they segregated, their leaders scapegoated them for the American Expeditionary Force's failure at Meuse Argonne in 1918, even though troops from both races struggled through the campaign. In the aftermath, 5 black officers were court-martialed on trumped-up charges with white Major J.N. Merrill of the 368th 1st Battalion writing his superior officer, "Without my presence or that of any other white officer right on the firing line, I am absolutely positive that not a single colored officer would have advanced with his men. The cowardice showed by the men was abject." Even though Secretary of War Newton Baker eventually commuted the officers' sentences, the damage was done, and the 92nd was off the line. So, as you see, as I've read about the Harlem Hellfighters and the Ebony Warriors as they were considered, they got their recognition and acknowledgement when they returned, even though Congress did not adhere until years later, 70 some odd years later. And again, I read about this and the fact that we're still living this. And this is history accounts of 1919. And what year are we in now? 2021? I'm just saying, America. Take a look. Take a look at your internal characteristic, your fiber, your existence, who you claim you are, and what we read about you. I'm just saying. With that, I'm dropping both mics. Peace out. Till next Thursday.